To be able to pay my way through school, he gave me work during the holidays. That means I didn't have holidays, unless you call work holiday. And in Form 2, and my father, who didn't like stress and had been stressed a lot during his detention years, calls me and said, you know, son, there are 7 of you, and I can't look after all of you as much as I would like to. So now that you have reached high school, why don't you look after yourself so that I can look after the others? And because I'm not one to refuse a challenge, I said, all right, Dad. And my dad turned around and gave me a post office savings book. In it was 42 shillings, 50 cents. I still remember the number, NYI for Nyeri, 8888. So I took the post office savings book and my 42 shillings and 50 cents in it. And I never returned home until many, many years later. Black faces were rare. In fact, in the accounting office, everybody, even by the time I had qualified as an accountant and everybody was Asian. But things, I guess, were changing. My problem was I hadn't become an accountant yet. And everybody used to come to Alliance High School to recruit. They wanted engineers, they wanted chemists, they wanted this, they wanted that. Nobody wanted an accountant. Nobody. And we had a careers master. And you were supposed to go through the careers master when you wanted to apply for a job. And after the usual corporate visits with people trying to recruit had come and gone, I sent a letter to Power and Lighting and to Magadi Soda Company and said, you came looking for engineers and whatever, aren't you interested in accountants? What that got me was a rebuke from the headmaster. How dare I circumvent the system and write directly to the companies? But I got a reply from both. Pan Lighting gave me a vacation job, and Magadi Soda told me, if you pass your A-levels, come and talk to us. Well, there are a lot of conditionalities there, so I went ahead, did my A-levels, accepted my place at the University of Nairobi, engineering, and waited. When the results came, they weren't too bad. And I went back to Magadi Soda. They had already taken 5 other students as engineers and chemists, like I said. And they were still not keen. And so I said, let me work with you for a while, then we'll see. And that's what I did. I also started golf at the same time because they had a golf course, which was a good thing. Eventually, common sense prevailed because what else could it be? And I found myself on an East African Airways Super VZ10 bound for London. I was very excited. Actually, I asked the pilot to let me sit in the cockpit as we flew, and he did. I think it was I'm impressed by my own self in asking that but he did. And I get to London, and I get promptly detained. And I say, what is the matter with these people? First my father, then my mother, and now. But they were right in this time, because in my bag, I had a box like this. When they opened, there was nothing in it. Where are you going? I am going to Liverpool. To do what? To train as an accountant. Where are your clothes? Where are your... They will buy them for me when I get there. They wouldn't believe me, so fortunately the telephones in the UK work. So they called, found that I was telling the truth. I always tell the truth, by the way. And it's a good idea because somebody might decide to check. Flew from London to Manchester. My host came, collected me, took me to Woolworth, catered me out, accompanied me on the train to Liverpool, and handed me over to somebody called Arthur Woven, senior partner, Edmund D. White and Sons, the representative office of Touch Ross, and my work started. The only problem was that they had never heard of Alliance High School. And said, which bush school did you go to? And I told them, the best school in Kenya. And they said, I'm sorry, without confirmation, you can't sign your articles. That's the way it used to work in those days. You sign articles and you work for free. You don't get paid. So I had to write, or we had to write to Cambridge University. Fortunately, in those days, those are the people who examined us. And they confirmed I had O levels and I had A levels. And then I was allowed to sign 4-year articles. Even if I had a degree or a PhD from the University of Nairobi, I would still have signed 4-year articles. They didn't recognize, they still don't recognize foreign degrees. So here I am in the land of the Beatles. It was a good city. It had 2 of everything, but that was for a reason. It had 2 cathedrals. It had 2 football teams. And it had Irish and Africans. 2 of everything. Why? Because it was a religiously divided city. One cathedral was Catholic, the other one was Anglican. One football team was Catholic, the other was... And that is the way we lived. We were slightly below the Irish when it came to looking for accommodation. But we were fellow sufferers, so we had to get on. But what had taken us there wasn't football teams or churches on Sunday or whatever, it was to read. And that is what I proceeded to do. The problem was, after winning 1 or 2 office prizes, my senior partner, this is the truth, and I better tell it because you people don't know this, said, my son, we have to discontinue these prizes because you have won the last 2 and it is bad for morale. That was his words. Anyway, we were used to that. And we continued. The exams were in 2 parts. I did my first part after 18 months, and the arrangement was after 18 months you could go back and get industrial attachment. I never thought I would be an auditor. I always, for some reason, I thought I would work in industry. So I asked to be allowed to take 6 months off for industrial attachment to Magadi Soda Company, who had sponsored me in any case. I was told you can't do that. I said, why? Because you can't. So I got my principal or partner, the partner in charge of my training, to write and say, maybe you don't understand, Mr. Gadenje is a Kenyan and he will return to Kenya when he qualifies, so let him go and do his industrial attachment. I got another letter. Please inform your clerk, Mr. Gavinji, that he is taking a British qualification, and the longer he stays in Britain, the better for him. So I didn't get my industrial attachment and decided to come home on holiday anyway, or my company agreed that I could come home, and got holiday work, if you like, with Kenya Commercial Bank. The reason why I mentioned that is they put me in the accounting department. I had this intermediate qualification, and I was looking around and discovered a 10,000 shilling whole deficit. And I go to the head of the department and say, there is some money missing here. And he looks at me and listens to me and said, leave it with me. I said, which was a mistake. I said, no, this is the action to take. Unfortunately, the people I was asking him to take action on were the same color as he, and he said, young man, I am the boss here. So I left it with him. And I know what happened to those young men. Instead of ending up in some magistrate's court, they were put on a plane and sent back home. So at least some justice was done. Now, I was still here in July when something happened. And then I had to leave the country in a hurry because I was thinking that this would be another 2007. You know what happened 5th July 1969? Yeah. When Tom Mboya was being assassinated, I was here. And I had to leave in a hurry, thinking that the borders would be closed, which of course they weren't. But the good thing about 1969 is CASNEB was also launched. So remember that. I went back. I had 2 more exams to do, which we did. But in my final year, I was doing the audit of Imperial Chemical Industries, which was the parent company of Magadi Soda Company, and the finance director, a very tall guy called Charlton, met me in the corridor and said, who are you? I said, I am your auditor. Where are you from? I am from Kenya. And he said, Kenya doesn't need chartered accountants. It needs accounts clerks. What are you doing here? We were taught to be nice to our customers, our clients, so I said, you're right, sir, and moved on. At this time in Liverpool, a more talkative person than myself had joined me in the name and the face of Care, Matthias Care. In the end, actually, Power and Lighting had offered me a training scholarship, but I didn't take it. I took the other one, and I'm glad I did, because then, when Care came out and wanted to be an accountant, there was already a decision waiting. And that's how they joined me in Liverpool. And a few years later, actually I think maybe slightly a year after I had left, Daniel Donye came by. I left them there. Actually, I left Care, my car, my flat, and everything else I had, and came home. And I'm sure you have heard me say that I left before my articles expired. That's how anxious I was to get here. Despite all that training, when you came here, you became a management trainee. The process was that we were being trained to take over from the expatriates, who were very many. But the expatriates were not willing to go. And therefore, the process was extended and extended as much as humanly possible without appearing to be frustrating the government plans. But it was good because as a management trainee, apart from being a qualified accountant, I personally operated the most modern accounting machine in the company at that time, which was the NCR 400. None of you, I'm sure, know what that is. The National Cash Register 400 was the top of the range accounting machine. So I prepared salaries, I prepared accounts, I prepared everything. My boss at the time was a guy called Philip Edgerton. He was a cost and works accountant. And I was thinking now, between us, who is, when you are young, you challenge everything. It took a year and a half before he came over to me and said, son, I am retiring and I want to leave the department to you to run. And he brought me all the books that he had. So I'm going back to 1928 on accounting. But the company had other ideas. They were not ready for an African head of department. And so rather than me being head of department, I don't know how old I was at the time, 20-something, they decided that they would amalgamate, ridiculous as it sounds, finance and sales. And the Muzungu sales manager would be termed the commercial director. And I would be the accountant. I said, it doesn't work like that. But they wouldn't listen. I can't report to a non-accountant. How? But they wouldn't listen. And so I left. And they went back to the government and said, the person we have spent a lot of money on training and what has left now, issue us with another work permit. And so the government did issue another work permit. And the guy they brought was an accountant, fair enough, and he was promptly made finance director, which was the position I was looking for. So I told you that I was learning French, and a young man at the time, I don't know whether he's still alive, called Sean Hawkins. He used to run Hawkins and Associates. Actually, two things happened. Heard about me and called me out of the blue and said, can we talk? I said, yeah. And then Mr. Mwangi, of Pano, Bell House Mwangi, also called me and said, can we talk? So we drove with Mwangi from Nairobi to Nakuru. He lived actually in Nakuru, and that was the headquarters of the company. He said, I am alone in this farm, blah, 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 blah. Why don't you? I said, I have just spent 5 years fighting Muzungus, and now I come back to Kenya, and you want me to start all over again? And I turned him down. Actually, I wish I hadn't. So my next job, therefore, was with Total Oil. And for those of you who don't know what oui, monsieur means, that's what it means in French. Yes, sir. They advertised for a roving auditor. By the time I landed, they had changed How does it go? Thank you. Okay, thank you. We are back on. And so I joined Total Oil. I thought I was joining as finance manager, but in fact, the job I was given was relief manager. And in that capacity, I never even went to the head office in Nairobi. I was told on such and such a day, you report to Lusaka, Zambia, and take over from the finance manager who is there. That's where the copper comes in. So I did a stint in Zambia. Then I was sent to Tanzania. That's where Ujamaa is. And then that horrible man did what he did in Uganda. And nobody wanted to go there. So guess what? I was sent to Uganda. After losing 2 cars to Idi Amin soldiers, because I made a mistake actually, the company put me in Godfrey Benaiza's house, which was quite large, but he was not in the country anyway. He later came back as president, I think, in fact. It was a very suspicious thing for anybody to be occupying such a house. So after losing 2 cars, I decided that you can want to be an accountant, but not that desperate as to risk your life. And I told the company, I'm sorry, I have to leave this place. They agreed, but they were not ready for me to come to head office, and I was sent now straight back to London. The one thing we got at our time, which you people maybe don't get now, is training, training, training. Why? Because of this delay in takeover or handover or whatever it is you like to. So another year I spent in London and Paris. I improved my French a little, and then I came back. The NCR 400 had gone, and now we had computers finally. And perhaps actually the most important thing I'm proud of is that with our IBM System 3, myself and another accountant called Amin Mauji, he's left the country, we immigrated to Canada many years ago. He was internal auditor. Developed a costing system, computer-based costing system that allows us to capture so much detail in terms of the expense that it was adopted by the company for African operations. And so in 1975 and 1976, I was in Nigeria, I was in Ivory Coast, I was in Senegal, installing these systems for us. So now that French I had learned by accident actually came in very useful. And you might think that that maybe is how I acquired my Pan-African bug, if you can call it that, my desire for things African. I suspect that it comes from that period. Never mind that when I got to Nigeria, the marketing manager was away, so I was occupying his office. And when he returned, he ordered that the chair be promptly banned in case I had put juju on it. I would have called that very wasteful, but it was normal for Nigerians, apparently. Oh. There you are. So I did that for like 4 or 5 years. And I was getting tired of the fact that the French were taking advantage of the fact that I speak French, but they don't speak English. And we are operating in an English-speaking environment. So I would get a general manager each time, no word of English, and I have to go through practicing my French on him and he practicing his non-existent English on me. And I decided perhaps it's time to move on. And so I did. And while I was in Ivory Coast, I had met the president of the African Development Bank, and he had offered me a job anyway as director of audit. Actually, the same job where is Dr. Hook was to come to occupy many years later. So here I am getting ready to go to Abidjan, Ivory Coast, to take up this job, and I go to the government and say, this is an Pan-African institution, so you need government's blessing. I went to Foreign Affairs, and Foreign Affairs said, Mr. Kareithi would like to speak to you. The Kareithi in question was the head of the civil service, Mr. G.K. Kareithi. And I felt very excited. I thought I was going to be given a letter to take to the president of the African Development Bank and say, this is the first senior Kenyan we are sending and we think. But no. He said, East African Airways has just collapsed. The government is starting up an airline, and we need you to go and help. Where he got my name from, I have no idea. I said, the government can't afford me. I am a very expensive chartered accountant now, you know, and I was going to work for tax-free dollars. He said, remember, young man, the government never forgets, the Kenyatta government, he said, actually those were his words, never forgets those who help it. And so, with that kind of persuasion, I went to Kenya Airways as financial controller this time on a special salary. And took over from the Irish who had been assigned, Aer Lingus who had been assigned to run the airline. There was nothing wrong with the job. It was very exciting. But I think power got to my head because I got tired of people using the airline for free. And one day, security people called me and tell me that there is somebody coming with 300 kilos of baggage. And he has told London office that he will pay in Nairobi. So I said, fine, make him pay. And he said, he is not willing to pay. And I said, why? Because he is so-and-so. So I said, hey, detain the baggage. That man was probably the most powerful man in Kenya at the time, except nobody had told me. And he wore pinstripe suits. And before long, the chairman of the company, who was a failed former government minister of agriculture, called me and said, Mr. Kathenji, the government would like you to resign. I said, which government? After 3 months of haggling, I discovered who the government was. Because one evening in my house at 7 o'clock, I got a knock on the door and somebody came and said, good evening, sir. I said, good evening. May I have the keys to your office and your car and blah, blah, blah. I said, who sent you? I'm not at liberty to say, sir. And that's how I left Kenya Airways. It was a good decade, you know. Where we are now in my story is a good decade because in 1977, ICPAK had been formed. In 1977, we had passed the Accountants Act, and in 1978, we had formed this great organization where we are now. Well, okay, I had been in industry now for 10 years, and Pano Bewas Mwangi were my auditor, so I decided that, fair enough, now let me go and find out whether Mr. Mwangi is still interested in us working together. I had no choice anyway. So I found that in the meantime, they had trained one or two other local accountants. There was a Muchekehu there, and there was a Moirori there. And I joined as director of something. I was there for all of 3 months before somebody came along and said, have you forgotten that you are the auditors of most of the government parastatals? So what are you doing with that man? That was the way things worked in those days. So I left. And this time I decided I've had enough and set up my own business. It was in Mansion House, 5th floor, 1 room, Remington Rad typewriter, Olivetti calculator, and a temporary typist. And that's how we started. My first client was a Mr. Benson Karia. He was PC Northeastern. I still remember. He wanted a cash flow projection because he was applying for a loan at the bank. I charged him 2,400 shillings. He has never paid. So, but that didn't hold me back, and before long, I was told that there was a farm called Cooksatten, where 2 partners were squabbling, I don't know over what, and they had decided to part company, and I went and found one of them called, what was he called now? Who? Yeah, Tony Blackhall. You can tell I'm getting old. And so Tony Blackhall and I joined together, and I said, we have to change the name. I can't work for Cooksatten. And that's how Cooksatten, Gavinji and Company came into being. And we carried on and made good business and good money until the era of mergers and acquisitions came about. And Pano Bewas Mwangi and Anthony Winnie at the time, and Cooksatten managed to merge. And the rest, as they say, perhaps is history. This was 1988. And at that time, by then, I had become chairman of the institute. And really, my entire international career arose because I was chairman of the institute at the time. So there was nothing mythical or magical about it. We were invited to the board, and Daniel Donya and I decided, I don't know whether he was my vice chairman, we would go together. The only problem is, you don't know how lucky you are. In those days, you paid yourself. The institute had no money. And Daniel, I don't know why actually, maybe because I had practiced for longer, he didn't want to perhaps to spend the money. I went alone. And that's how I joined the ICPAK board. I think the story of me with ICPAK has been told many times. The only thing I would want to say is that we Kenyans don't seem to take these things very seriously. I said ICPAK had been formed in 1977. The first representative, African representative, was a Nigerian, and he had served 10 years until 1987. But he wasn't ready to rotate off. So when it was suggested that Kenya took over, he took objection. How can a small country which is still run by Muzungus represent the African continent? He argued. And he brought his ambassador along to say so. But common sense maybe prevailed, and that's how I joined the board of ICPAK. And I think a lot of you have read about it. And because I have to cut short my speech, I will not go into the ICPAK stories available elsewhere. But it was at ICPAK that I was told, Africa is not organized, can you do something about it? And that's how the idea of ICPAK came along. I was given a budget of $20,000. We used it to travel around the continent. By the time ICPAK was formed in 1990 in Mauritius, I still had $5,000 in the account, which I passed on to the institute. I hope they are happy about it. At the same time, a friend of mine called Jim Nambaru and I were discussing other things, and we thought even African stock exchanges are not organized. And because we had the Zimbabweans visiting the Nairobi Stock Exchange at the time, we got around and said, why don't we launch up an African organization? And that's how that came about. The only thing is that he made me pay for the dinner for the launch, and I had forgotten that I now work for a Big 8. And in Big 8 firms, Mr. Wawero here will tell you, because he was in one, you have to get partners' permission to do things. And they didn't think that I had got permission, and therefore I ended up having to pay out of my own pocket. But I think it was for a good cause. ISA stands for the International Standards of Accounting and Reporting, which is an organization that was set up in 1983. And the only thing I want to say is this, that I don't know why we in Kenya do things sometimes the way we do them. Everybody was there trying to influence UNCTAD's decisions because it is a subset of UNCTAD. I was there in a different capacity because I was in ICPAK and we were trying to promote SME standards of accounting. And I whisper to you, if you don't repeat to anyone else, the delegate, one time the delegate that Kenya sent to an international conference on accounting and reporting was your registrar of motor vehicles. Now, seriously, I don't know. So we finished with ICPAK in 2010. My job was promote participation by Africans. When I went there, there were none. When I left, there were 37 of them, 7 of them Kenyans, on merit. And I really want to say something. The technical competence I saw this morning displayed by the people who are talking to us on standards amazed me. I feel so happy because for many years, some of us had to be everything. It's an audit conference, you go. It's an accounting conference, you go. It's an ethics conference, you go, because there was nobody else to send. But those 2 young men, and I'm sure there are others like them, would do Kenya proud at any conference, I can tell you that. Now, I can't go away without saying we have to do something. We are ICPAK. We need to do something about the levels of corruption in this country. I forgot to say I'm retired now, which is why I can speak like this. It's becoming embarrassing. And it is incompatible with professionalism. And I am frustrated because I don't know the answer to it. If you look at the cheating in the exams, How do you ensure that the doctor that you go to for treatment isn't the one who got through somehow? Do you want us to go around carrying security guards, or do we want a secure environment? That, to me, is perhaps the only thing I regret, seeing the degree to which we have sunk. And how that when God closes one door, he does what? Yes, except that is not true. God actually never opens any other door if he closes one. What he does is just he loosens another door or another window, but never opens it. It's up to you to struggle and throw it open and walk in and do what you have to do. And if you wonder why I talk with a sense of humor, it's because that's the only way I could have survived what I had to survive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, FCPA, for that wonderful session. I believe we've learned one or two things. I think one of the things that I got through the session is determination. Actually, FCPA has like 9 lives. He has lived like 9 lives, different shades and colors, different challenges, but he didn't give up. He always went down and came up stronger. And my question probably to each and every one of us is, what story are you writing? It's very important that you write a story that 20 years, 30 years down the line can be replayed over and over again, and you appreciate. I'll give this session, the next session I will do back to back because of time. So I'll invite our next speaker. Who will take us through financial management issues in infrastructure projects in Africa. That is none other than Mr. Michael Mutiga. Michael Mutiga is the Managing Director and Head of Corporate and Investment Banking in Citibank. He has wide experience. He was previously the Director of Citibank South Africa, based corporate finance in corporate finance division from up to 2011, that is from 2006. Michael also formerly worked with Barclays, where he joined as management associate in 2002 and rose through the ranks. That was based in Johannesburg, South Africa. Following the acquisition of Barclays with ABSA in 2005, December 2005 and September 2006, Michael was the regional head of East African for Investment Banking Division. Michael has a wealth of experience both in corporate and investment banking, and his experience covers multiple areas on capital and debt transactions. Previously, Michael worked with Hamilton, Harrison, and Matthews. He is a lawyer by profession. He has LLB and LLM. He also worked with Holland and Knights in Atlanta. He's also an advocate of the High Court. I will take this chance. Kindly let's appreciate him as he comes to the stage to take us through the topic. Thank you.
Thank you, CPA Omolo. I'll say two things. After the fantastic talk by Mr. Gadinji here, I think I've got a very difficult task to keep you awake for the remaining portion of this afternoon. The second thing is the last time I was in a room with more than 20 accountants was a project that went bad. So I hope this time round, this is not an indication that we're in for more trouble. The session today, I was asked to speak about financial management issues in infrastructure projects in Africa. And the way we've structured this discussion is, first of all, an introduction for the benefit of the wider team on project finance and how it works and the mechanics. And as you go through that, you'll then get to see and appreciate what some of the issues were in terms of transactions going bad or infrastructure projects not working out as they should have. As I go through this, I'll indicate some of the examples of infrastructure projects on the continent that could have been done better, or those that have been done in an exceptional manner. So with that, I'll just start with an introduction. Project finance as a practice is basically premised on the fact that you're looking at funding and establishing projects with a limited recourse structure. Limited recourse basically means that the sponsors have a limited or no risk to the project beyond the project vehicle itself. The cash flows to repay the funds or to establish a project come from a combination of the sponsors and debt, which I'll get into. And you structure the project in a manner that seeks to mitigate risks to just the project vehicle and the project structure. The difference to what we typically see as what we call corporate finance borrowing and project finance is that in corporate finance borrowing, you're looking at typically a company borrowing on its balance sheet, while in project finance, you're looking at a specially established vehicle or entity to execute the project, borrow, and basically repay debt under the project structure. One of the things I'll highlight is that a lot of the view I'm giving here is a banker's view, but a lot of the terms and terminologies will be applicable to you as CPA and accounting professionals. In corporate finance, the security would be specifically a charge or debenture over the assets. In a project finance structure, you're only looking at a charge over the project itself and not the wider cash flows of the sponsors. Revenue flow, in corporate finance, you're looking at the wider corporate flows to meet debt service, while in the case of project finance, you're restricted only to the revenues of the project. Financial covenants, again, if you look at corporate finance and your typical corporate financing, you're looking at negative pledges and your standard corporate covenants, leverage, debt service, and gearing. And in the case of project finance, you'll be looking at primarily the maintenance of a debt service reserve or account to meet debt service requirements. And lastly, in terms of dividends or distributions to the sponsors, there is no restriction or impairment to a disbursement in a typical corporate finance or corporate structure. But typically with projects, you'll find that distributions are only allowed upon project completion, once the reserve accounts have been funded, once you've maintained the requisite coverage ratios, and there has been no event of default under the project structure. So why project finance? I think the reality is that given the demand for infrastructure and projects in Africa, one estimate I saw was that it's expected that Africa will require $100 billion of financing just for roads over the next 10 years. The reality is that there are no sponsors of that scale or magnitude who are able to finance transactions of that nature. So the intention is to put in place a structure that limits risk to the project, that ring fences cash flows, that enables sponsors to leverage up and gear up the project in a way that you can actually finance a larger project than you could have ordinarily on your balance sheet. Which brings on to your off-balance sheet treatment. In most cases, the projects are treated as off-balance sheet risk to the sponsors. It allows you to leverage up the project, and it allows you then to manage multi-sponsor issues. The typical project, and I'll come to that, has a wide range of parties involved in the execution and development, and putting up a special vehicle to establish that helps mitigate some of the risks on partner management. Lastly, from a bank perspective, you see a lot of market appetite. People are willing to fund and engage in projects, and in some cases, you do improve the wider financials of the sponsor company. But it's not always appropriate. If you look at situations where assets are too strategically important, be it roads, be it airports in some cases, it's difficult to create and enforce security over it, and you have to look at a different mechanism to make that work. The process for project finance is fairly complex. In most cases, it will take you at least a year, maybe some cases up to 3 years to execute a project. Reporting requirements and covenants do restrict flexibility of the project vehicle in terms of financial and operational flexibility. And risk allocation is where things either succeed or fall apart. And in most cases, you do find that while project financing can improve the risk and cost profile, in other cases it doesn't. I think I need to get Bonagazenji to show me how to use this. Yeah, I think it's gone back.
So you press that one, it won't go forward.
Yeah, it's actually not working. Yeah. Oh, there you go. Now, if you look at what project finance and infrastructure finance is typically adopted for, it's various sectors looking at large capex requirements. So industrial, from refineries to fertilizer plants to cement plants, power, and we see a lot of that in Africa in terms of independent power production and distribution networks. Oil and gas, which hopefully as a country will get to move into in the next few years. Infrastructure, roads, ports, airports, telecommunication networks, metals and mining, transportation, and transportation in respect to liquefaction plants, gas, LPG type equipment. So this is your typical project finance structure. And I think you can see where the challenges come in from a financial management perspective. Everything fundamentally rotates around the project vehicle or the project SPV. Now, I know SPVs in Kenya have had a bad reputation, and I'll come to some of those reasons in a bit. But the reality is that if you're going to ring fence the cash flows, ring fence the capital, and ensure execution, you do need to set up a separate vehicle or separate department to cover that for you. Now, if I take each of these legs in more detail, the most important part is who is sponsoring the project. So, and in sponsors, you're talking about who's contributing the equity, who's initiating the idea, who's executing the project. It can be the government, it can be corporate entities. How you structure that, the equity contributions towards that are critical to success. The next leg is who's going to finance the debt portions of this. Typically, the lenders will require some kind of ring fencing structure, which is assignment of sales revenues, the creation of escrow arrangements, debt service reserves, but the balance of funds once the debt service requirements, interest and principal are met, then flow back to the project vehicle. The government, in most cases, we look at the nature of the projects, is a critical party. Everything from authorizations, permits, land rights, termination compensation, and guarantees would be required. Licenses in terms of engineering and execution, and who's the offtake. And one of the things you find most projects failing on is this question of who is actually going to use and pay for this. Whether it's going to be a toll road and vehicle movement, or whether it's going to be a telecoms network and users of that network, or power, where electricity is paid for under your usual tariff. The question of offtake is probably the most critical aspect for any project. Who's going to pay for this, how long, and how certain are those cash flows? Then you've got the supply of goods and material to the project. And then in some cases, especially when you're looking at, for example, railways or ports or infrastructure type projects, you will have an operator to manage it and run it on a day-to-day basis once you've established a project, and the credibility of that operator is critical to success. Lastly, as and when needed, you may have insurance to ring fence and protect risks on the project. So this gives you a more granular look as to what those risks and contractual requirements are, and how you parcel out those risks between the parties. So, for example, if you look at the left-hand side, the government, everything from the right to build and the laws around that construction, the product company, managing demand, managing the finance risk, tax, and legal risks, and the contractors, especially during the contract execution phase, managing the costs, the design, time and execution, defects, safety and concerns, ground conditions, and operations and maintenance. Every project has this facet as the execution facet in establishing the project, and then that moves on to the operations and maintenance phase, which is post-completion and day-to-day management and running of the project. Each aspect carries certain level of risks. So be it market risk, which is in essence, will people utilize or pay for the project? Price risk, if you're looking at mining, for example, you're taking commodity risk on copper, say, or aluminium. You're taking political risk and regulatory risk. Will there be a change in tax regime? Will there be a change in accounting regulations? You take project completion risk, that the project will be completed on time, that you've got the right permits, that the construction and cost overruns will be managed well, that events of force majeure, which are in essence those events you have got no control over, have either been insured, mitigated, or in some way boxed. And then economic completion, you have to have visibility of the entire supply chain. An example of that is, say, the oil terminals, where you need to see where your flow is coming from, where it's going to, at what price, and what margin are you paying either a toll or as a merchant to meet the costs of the project. Operational risk is a risk that when you complete the project, it actually runs. And if you take, for example, power plants, and we've had examples of that in this country, where you complete an independent power plant and it actually doesn't run or doesn't run to the level that is expected from an output perspective. There's macroeconomic risk, interest rates, exchange rates, and inflation. And I mentioned force majeure earlier, which basically are natural events, everything from acts of God, floods, and the like, to political events, strikes, war, and political change. Risk allocation is critical throughout the process. And this slide gives you a sense of how you can parcel out and who the responsible party is for each of those risks. So the sponsors will take the risk of the development, from the technical feasibility, the commercial feasibility, the economics, the permits and authorizations, third-party interventions, and political change. Construction risk is taken up by the contractors. Typically it's completion, costs, any design changes, interest rate risk, damages, force majeure, currency changes, as well as foreign exchange. That risk is borne both by the sponsor and by the contractor. The one thing you'll notice is throughout the project life cycle, the sponsor's risk never goes away. At the end of the day, the buck stops with the sponsor. And the last part is the operational risk in terms of market changes, fuel and materials, operational and maintenance, interest rate risk, and the like, which typically will be borne by the sponsors as well as lenders and the government. I'll skip this in the interest of time, but this gives you a sense of the contractual terms, which are who's doing the EPC, engineering, procurement, and construction, your offtake, who's actually going to be, who are you delivering this project to and for, operational and maintenance, as well as government consents and concessions and licenses. Which brings into the role of financial management and how critical that process is. It happens in two facets. The first chart gives you a sense of the roles of financial management throughout the process, which are one, implementation of the project. So you monitor progress, assess the risk, quantify changes. You evaluate progress in terms of the implementation. You report both internally within the project company and externally, and you provide and you communicate those reports, what it means from an impact perspective, from a cost overruns perspective, from an execution perspective. Every project has an implementation parameter or sandbox, and typically for all your intents and purposes, while the blue line in the middle gives you what ideally is the situation, execution is a zigzag around those parameters. The role of financial management in the process is to ensure that you don't exceed the requisite parameters throughout either the scope or the execution of the project. So that is covering everything from the initiation, the execution, the completion, and the operations and management. So this gives you a quick sense of a banker's view of your typical infrastructure financing. You've got your project SPV, the asset, be it a power plant or a pipeline. You have a debt service reserve account where the funds or cash flow from utilization of the project gets funded to. You fill that, it's like a tub, you fill it up, the excess goes back to the company, and the funds in the account then goes towards debt service for the lenders. And these are typical terms you see: security, interest rate, the project accounts, covenants tied to the financing, and the conditions precedent to the financing. In terms of sources of finance, this gives you a sense of how your typical project gets funded. So during the construction phase or execution phase, you'll have senior financing, be it bond debt, banks, export credit agencies. Now, export credit agencies are typically entities set up by governments to support infrastructure development. For example, EKICSA in South Africa, MIGA in the US. And the intention is that those governments to support exports from those countries, be it power plants from GE or be it aircraft, these export credit agencies provide enhancement to financiers to support those exports. And then you've got your development banks, be it African Development Bank, the World Bank itself, the IFC, FMO, DEG, which are respectively Dutch and German. Then you've got your junior financing. And what junior means in this sense is in the event of default, your senior debtors, your senior funders get paid first, and your junior funders then get paid second from the residual funds from the project on liquidation. Then you have equity, which is a sponsor's equity. The government, in terms of their contribution, be it grants, land rights, and concessions, and then any pre-completion revenues that you might get in the process. Once a project is completed, you then have your operational funding structure. And typically you'll find that the debt and equity piece can be refinanced post-completion because now you have a steady cash flow to meet debt service. Excuse me. This gives a sense of what the debt services are, excuse me. Thank you. Excuse me. So in more detail, you've got your commercial bank debt, you've got private placements, which are typically unlisted bonds. We now see cases of Islamic financing coming through, ECA debt, multilateral debt, or bonds in the local bond markets. So I think this is the key point for this conference and this talk. What are the success factors and what are the failing or key concerns from a finance perspective? Every project must be designed with foresight in terms of what is the need you're meeting, how will it be paid, and what are the fundamentals. If you get any of those three aspects wrong, the project will not succeed. So, in terms of what is the need, are you servicing either power shipment, power generation, oil transportation, or the like? You have to look at the uncontrollable factors. We saw a situation in a pipeline, Chad-Cameroon pipeline. This was financed in 2003, $4.5 billion. And what happened in that situation is the Chad government in 2005 decided that oil revenues will no longer be used to pay for the project, but instead he'll pay for his military spending and other pressures in Chad. As a result, project cash flows dried up and collapsed. You have to therefore find ways to box in, mitigate, and identify those uncontrollable factors. In that case, that was political risk. Proven technology. As much as we look at new technologies on a regular basis, the reality is that if you try an experiment with unproven technology, your probability of failure increases from a technical perspective. And that can delay completion, or worse, hamper the operation and maintenance of the project. You have to look at supply agreements and cost competitiveness. The lower the cost in anything in life, the better. And you have to look at the offtake agreements. I'll give an example of power. Most power projects are underpinned by what we call a PPA, Power Purchase Agreement, which in Kenya is signed with the Kenya Power and Lighting Company. If you don't have set offtake agreements, the reality is that you will not have a guaranteed cash flow, meaning therefore the project cannot be financed in a sustainable manner in the long run. Sponsors. The ability for sponsors to execute a project is critical. I think we've seen that in Kenya in a number of instances where, I'll give an example of the railways concession. The sponsor to begin with was incapable of doing the project. You have to have realistic objectives, both in terms of timeline for the project completion, as well as the capacity of the contractor or operator to actually conduct their part of the role. You have to manage FX risk. FX risk in particular is very important because most projects are actually funded offshore. So you're taking either dollar risk or euro risk, and you're relying on local currency cash flows to meet the debt service. And you've got inadequate insurance coverage being a problem in future. All right. Going back to the number one reason why projects fail, government interference. And this can take the form of nationalization, expropriation, or exchange controls, where if the government doesn't provide the requisite support and certainty, then you're likely to see project failures. If the plan was poorly conceived to begin with, again by the government, then again you're likely to see project failures. An example is Nelson Mandela Bay rapid bus transport system. It was established by the government in South Africa to try and provide mass transport in Nelson Mandela Bay. The reality is, after the World Cup, they have got roughly 60 buses costing a total of about 100 million rand, which have been lying idle in the county since then. Reasons why it failed: one, they poorly planned the buses, they poorly planned the structure, they've had multiple consultants coming on board to try and execute it, and has been basically a technical failure in that respect. And I think that is a quick summary. I do have, and I think we'll share this with the committee, more specific examples of the key risks from an individual sector perspective. So power generation, upstream oil and gas, midstream and downstream oil and gas, telecoms, and transport. And we'd be happy to provide any additional information required. Thank you.
Thank you very much, our speaker, Mr. Michael Mutiga. That was a wonderful presentation. I know because of time we had to really summarize, but we've learned something on the differences between corporate finance and project finance, the project finance structures, what to look for, the risk mitigation measures on project management, the roles of financial project management, sources of financing, and the success factors, which is quite well taken. We'll have to share the notes with the members. I'll give this chance for questions. We'll start from this side. Questions either to the first speaker or the second speaker. I can see a hand at that end. Please say your name and whom the question is being directed to.
Good afternoon. My name is Ruben Mayenda, and my question is to Michael. The government or Kenya is struggling with this concept of PPPs, that is public-private partnerships. I don't know what the challenge is, because we've been talking of this for a number of years and it's not taking off. Can you shed some light from the financing perspective, whether the impediments are from your side or it's the government which is not taking off with the concept? Thank you.
Okay, any other question?
Good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth. My question goes to Bwana Gadhinji. Thank you so much for that very strong testimony. And on the journey of accountancy. One thing that I observed or I picked is that we moved from looking for people with knowledge and skills to whom we know, regardless of whether they know the subject matter or not. And obviously, from the previous discussions, that had been very apparent. And I think that is one of the reasons we are where we are. And my concern is, what would be your advice for getting us back to the accountancy of the truth?
Thank you. Yes, as soon as you have the mic, you can ask your question.
Thank you. My name is Charles Sirasugu. I am having a question to Mr. Gitenchi. I just call him Mzee Wakazi because I got the whole story from him. Now, listening to Mr. Gitenchi and...
Please, we can't get you clearly. Just...
You see the mic? Are you getting me? Listening to Mr. Githinchi and Mr. Osodo yesterday, and indeed a couple of other presenters, the issue of ethics and integrity and anti-corruption is very key in terms of what is happening in Kenya today. And looking at it, I know there are many players into that area in terms of the FICE or promoting the FICE, but the accountancy profession, in my view, has a lot to do in stopping acts of corruption for purposes of having economic prosperity, especially given that we play a very important role. And for once, as I ask the question, I'm just imagining if we took financial reporting and accounting just like the role of a doctor, and what will happen in a situation where doctors misdiagnose diseases, they misdispense drugs, they misreport status of patients, and all those kind of things. You can imagine the kind of chaos. What is ailing the accountant's profession, in your own view, following the history, and what can be done to improve the situation?
Thank you. I'll give the chance to Mr. Githinchi to take us.
I didn't catch your name. I'm sorry for both the questions, but I'll try and answer what I heard. What would be my advice for getting back to a system where skills and such like were appreciated? And I think it is similar to what is failing the accountancy profession and what it needs to do. And I'll say two things. One is that if you or we persist in operating a system that is not based on merit, then we are operating a system that is by definition discriminatory and will lead us nowhere. And what I think Kenya suffers from is that it has been surrounded by countries that have not challenged its leadership position or role because they themselves had a lot of problems. But that will not always be the case. In fact, that is not the case. We now have economies that are better run, better disciplined, and really competition maybe will force Kenya to realize the folly of its ways. I think we have sacrificed too much on the altar of politics, with politics driving every agenda. And as a result, we have not made progress where we should have done in order actually to be able to move the country forward. But it's not that we do not know what requires to be done. It's just that our priorities are wrong. I would like to give you two examples from my story that I cut out before and maybe I should have done. Having been kicked out of Kenya Airways so unceremoniously, comes 1991 and the government wants to privatize Kenya Airways. And I'm in London and I get a call. You have been appointed to the commission to privatize Kenya Airways. I said, now what? The one question I put to Professor Saito, the Minister of Finance at the time, is I'll serve on this commission on one condition and one condition only, that we can actually privatize and remove it from government control. He said, you can recommend what you like. So, I served. That gentleman who had sent those people to my house on that evening that I was telling you about Obviously, the pinstriped guy isn't the one who gives the orders. He has his underlings to do that for him. So it was the PS in the ministry. I was sitting in my office in Ansant Young one day, and the former PS Foreign Affairs, whom I knew, comes and says, Mr. Karenji, how are you? I said, how are you? I was going to say his name, but I shouldn't. I have a visitor for you who is at the reception, but maybe you may not want to see him. So I said, yeah. Can I go for him? He said, yeah, you are my friend, go bring him. So he went and brought this man, who was the PS at the time. And this is a true story. This man says to me, I have cancer. I have not very long to live. I want to come and say sorry about the way we treated you in Kenya Airways. That's a true story. So we know when we are doing wrong. We know what to do right. What we are lacking is the commitment and the will and the people to challenge us to do the right thing. That's my view.
I think the question was raised was respect to PPPs, public-private partnerships in Kenya. There are three things about PPPs in Kenya that probably needs to be put into context. Number one, the Ministry of Finance and the team at PPP have actually done a good job in trying to establish a framework to execute PPPs in this country. There actually wasn't one before that. Now, what that means is that you have to see how you evaluate and ascertain the right sponsors. Because I think the biggest challenge for any project is who's the counterparty or the sponsor who the government is going to work with to execute the project. Do they have financial strength? Do they have expertise? Do they have experience? Do they have the long-term intent to see the project through? The second thing is you have to have the legal framework to support the project, which includes are you able to carve out the SPV or the special purpose vehicle into an entity that in the event of default, lenders can realize on that asset. And if you take, for example, the idea of roads, then that's not going to be feasible. So which leads on to the third point. The government then needs to provide, or somebody needs to provide, a backstop to lenders and to the equity providers that the event the project does not succeed, they will come in and fill those shoes. And the reality under the current project, Public Finance Management Act is that the government is limited in terms of what kind of guarantees it can issue. So therefore, the government can't be the backstop to all projects going forward, meaning that we now also, as a country, need to find alternative means and mechanisms to make those projects get realized. So I think the PPP unit does have a lot of work cut out for it, but I think the team are recognizing what some of the challenges are and how best they can parcel out those risks in the medium term.
Thank you very much. Because of time, I'll request we just have the last round of questions, then we wrap up. Yeah? Say your name and whom the question is directed to.
My name is Augustine Owing. I work with the Kenya National Examination Council. Thank you very much. My question, or not even a question, is a comment, but it will accompany with a question to Bwana Githinji. I'm so much impressed that memory can keep a man alive and give a testimony over a period of time. And we have passion sometimes, some of us, in history. And you are capable of really unfold your lifetime. It is encouraging in this kind of podium that we go back to the basics that you are actually trying to articulate. I can remember Osodo yesterday talk of it, that we should come down from the towers and actually face it in the basic way. My concern and what you have just said here, that we know what we want. And what now come to my mind is about the upbringing of individuals in families. To uphold the name of a family is the essence of being. And what you are trying to articulate on the basis of your upbringing, and to come to the light that actually we need each other in our journey of life. I'm very much concerned of the typical element rising today on the basis of family upbringing and upholding the name of our families. And I've chosen as an auditor and a hobby that to rediscover oneself is a critical thing in our lifespan. And I will challenge in the process of this dialogue that all of us have got a duty to ask one question: who am I? And I realize that all of us have got a task to incorporate in our busy schedule the reviving or documenting of our memory for the posterity, so that the future generation, now like what you have covered here, I hope it will belong. They say that in ICPAK Life, it's there for us to read in the YouTube. I hope it will be there for us to listen to your speech again. So what I'm asking, did we lose it in the process of family? You were here in the morning when people are challenging the family banks. The pioneers of the multinational companies have got a brand names in the names of their own families. Name them Ford. Name them in Europe, most multinational companies have got logos, foundation in the family. So where did we lose it now that we are still trying to talk about family as all evils? And everybody now think family was not to keep that tag of the sisters or the brothers keeper. Can you actually tell us that what actually went wrong? Because I'm realizing that we are losing it in the family front, to uphold the name and to make sure that the future generation can profit in that name. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We don't have any more questions, so I'll ask one more here. One here and the one at the back, the very end. The other members, if you have questions, please write them down and forward to us, and we'll ensure you get response. Please make it short.
Good afternoon. I'm CPA Wahungu. My question is to Mr. Gadinji. I've had your role as an accountant, but my question is, from your role as an accountant, the government was looking for you. Right now, as we speak in this room, which as per yesterday, 60% of us are working for the public sector. You realize that the careers of accountants are being raised down or being brought down within a night, even without having to look at the real issues, as what CPA Mugasa had said in the morning. What is the role of the institute in protecting the accountant in the public sector? My second question goes to Mr. Mutiga in terms of the infrastructure financing. What is the government doing in order to remove some of the conditions precedent, especially infrastructuring the infrastructure projects in the country? looking at especially the issue of the PPPs, I mean. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll try and answer that quickly if I can. You know, we Africans were born poor, many of us, and I don't know whether that is why we try to get as rich as quickly as possible. I mean, Ghana became independent in 57. By 1963, the ministers were sleeping in golden beds. We know that. That's a reported fact, as if you can only sleep in one bed, you can only drive one car, but for some reason I do not understand, there are some among us who are determined to put what they consider poverty as far behind themselves as possible. And to me, that is called greed. And I think that we are bringing up our children to admire or copy the wrong things. You know the story that is told when your child asks you whether he can have a second pair of shoes, and you tell him or her that, like in my case, I didn't have any shoes until I was 12, and he says, oh, why? Were your parents poor? Now, that to me is how some of us probably have brought up our own children. I suffered, so you don't have to suffer. I will make the money so you can have the life I didn't have as a child like you. I think that's the wrong message as far as I'm concerned. I think what you need to sell, what we need to sell are social values, hard work, honesty. If we don't do that, even the children that we are trying to protect, that we are raising in this atmosphere of plenty, will not benefit from the wealth that we leave behind. And you can actually tell why our society is not as caring of the future perhaps as it should be. When we got independence, we had a death duty tax. It was scrapped. Mr. Waweru will know that. We have never introduced it again. Why? Because we do not want to share the money that we have accumulated, and not always so honestly. And yet, if you think about it, actually the wealth in this country that should have been somewhat distributed by death duties was not even African wealth. There are a lot of other people making a lot more money in this country. But I've always asked ministers of finance why not. It will not pass in parliament, and I know there are CPAs. Let them try and introduce it. The way I argue is this: okay, even if you store the money, when you die, we'll get some of it back. And that is not what they want. The role of the institute in protecting the accountant in the public sector, it's actually not just protecting the institute, the accountant in the public sector, except that the accountant in the public sector is a lot more vulnerable and a lot more prone to pressure from illegal and improper sources. And so my request to Dr. Gumi and the ICPAK is this: have a system where a CPA who is being pressurized, who is being victimized, who is being mistreated because he is saying no to corruption and stealing of money, his case gets taken up by the institute itself so that you don't suffer in silence. That is the basic problem, that I resist corruption and I suffer alone and nobody recognizes it. To me, if we want to make this an issue, then we have to do it all together. I am not saying that all accountants are honest, but I think if the institute stood up to somebody who said no to corruption, if the institute was willing to take that, we have courts now where you can challenge the government. Why is that man being victimized? This, and get behind the facts. Then the message will start to trickle down that you can't get away with victimizing people who are only doing an honest day's job.
Okay, I think just a quick response to that question of the government. If you look at the government's priorities as set out under Vision 2030, infrastructure is key to the country's development. What they're trying to do in terms of ensuring the framework works is work through the logistical legislative changes that need to be effected, improve the screening of sponsors in terms of who the parties will be they're working with on the other end, prioritize which projects are monetizable and executable, and prioritize those sectors which will have the biggest impact to the country. So be it the oil pipeline or LAPSET or the SGR railway. They can't do everything. Just as the reality of finance, the reality of life. So I think in terms of trying to resolve the conditions precedent, it's mapping out the priority projects, the high impact projects, the high social impact projects, and then working through the legislative changes to get there. I think the legislation the government can propose, and subject to Parliament, of course, debating and agreeing, but the background work in terms of screening, in terms of selection, in terms of the equity is happening in most of the projects that we've looked at.
Thank you very much. Shall we put our hands together to appreciate our speakers for the day? In appreciation for our speakers for the presentations, I'll call upon our former ICPAK chair, FCPA Michael Waweru, to give a memento to our first speaker, FCPA Gadinji Ndungu. For your comfort, FCPA, you don't have to declare it. I'll call upon FCPA Shabir to present a memento to our second speaker, Mr. Michael Mutiga. Thank you very much, members. Thank you for your patience. I'll hand over the program to Tom, but as you remember, I had committed to give you the answer, the response that the student gave. After writing, I have gone home 100 times. The teacher was not available, so he wrote under there, teacher, I have written, I have gone home 100 times, and now I have went home. Basically, the message from this, you can look as the teacher as the auditor, the internal auditor or the external auditor, student as the accountant or the clerk there. Auditors, when we ask the questions, do we take time to explain why we need some of the information? Probably communication is lacking. Thank you. Tom, please take over.
A proper round of applause for the session leaders. So as we get to a close, a very short session to give you announcements, and then I will tell you something about Africa Congress of Accountants. In 2011, the Institute held the first Africa Congress of Accountants. That's the time when Pan-Africa Federation of Accountants was formed from EXAFA. And the chairman of the committee that organized the first Africa Congress of Accountants was none other than FCPA Ndungu Gadinji here. Let's clap for him. I just joined the institute, so I was the first secretary to the committee, and it was a great success. Since then, we've held 2 more, one in Ghana, the other one in Mauritius, which I also happen to be part of the organizing committee. Now we plan the next Africa Congress of Accountants shall be in Uganda. We are here with Simon Oola, CPA, from ICPAK, Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Uganda. I invite him over just to talk a bit about what's going to happen and how it's going to be like. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Or I'll say good evening, fellow CPAs. I'm a CPA Uganda on the basis of being a member of ICPAK. I did CPAK, both at Strathmore and KCA, so in the 90s, and that's how I became a CPA Uganda. I'm glad to be here to invite you to the 4th African Congress of Accountants. I'd like the DJ to first play the video, then continue from there.
The Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Uganda and the Pan-African Federation of Accountants welcome you to Uganda, the Pearl of Africa, for the 4th Africa Congress of Accountants. The Congress will be held at Speak Resort Munyonyo, Kampala, on the shores of Lake Victoria from 2nd to 5th May 2017. Uganda lies astride the equator with a tropical climate. It is endowed with the most beautiful wonders of nature, such as the source of the longest river in the world, the River Nile, the 2nd largest freshwater body in the world, Lake Victoria, plus other freshwater rivers and lakes, snow-capped Rwenzori Mountains, rich flora and fauna, including all the big 5 animals easily seen in the 10 national parks. Gorilla trekking and bird watching with over 1,000 bird species are very popular. Uganda boasts of cultural variety and very friendly people. Agriculture is the main economic activity, providing a lot of fresh fruits and foods. The 4-day Congress will focus on transforming Africa's economies through accountancy and accountability. There will be plenary and breakout sessions with splendid speakers from various African countries and beyond. In addition, a boat cruise and a tour of Kampala are planned.
Hey, on behalf of the Institute of the Certified Public Accountants of Uganda and the people of the Republic of Uganda, I'm privileged to invite you to the Pearl of Africa for the ACOA 2017 to be held in the beautiful city of Kampala, a city that never sleeps, full of nightlife and which is quite vibrant. Don't miss this lifetime experience.
Fellow CPS, I'd like to welcome you to Uganda. When you come to Uganda, if you don't want to sleep, the place you will not miss is Governor. You can miss any other place, don't miss Governor. When you're in Governor, you might think you're out of Africa. We are one East Africa. When I was giving out this in the morning with my colleague and a few members from ICPAK, some people, when they will look at it, they will think, SCCA, they didn't want to pick it, which gave me a message of being a nationalist. So we had to start repackaging our message. Please, welcome to Uganda for ACOA. Then people would pick it. ACOA is African Congress of Accountants, which is meant for us accountants from Africa, as Thomas told us. But normally what happens is the fees we pay are supposed to be like, if you're from Kenya, you're supposed to pay the international delegate fee. But because we are one East Africa, and because of our MRA, we've negotiated with PAFA to give us one rate as East Africa. So all people from East Africa are going to pay the local delegate fee of $525 to be able to attend the Congress. We shall be at Speak Resort Munyonyo, which has sufficient rooms for all of us. Each room will go for $100 per night. It is by the lakeside, and all our water bodies, or the majority of our water bodies, I would say about more than 90% of our water bodies are fresh water bodies. It's by the lakeside. What is in it for you? We are going to have presenters from all over the world, but at least we presenters have to be from Kenya. That is the minimum. Then you would want to come in and support your own. Along the African Congress of Accountants, PAFA is looking at having an IPSAS conference so that it can address some public financial management issues. We are still discussing with them so that we can move out and provide more information to the members. So people in the public sector will also be catered for that way. But within also the program for the Congress, we are going to cover both public sector as well as private sector issues. Yesterday, some of the issues which came up when the chairperson or the president of PAFA presented were about opportunities. Some of us in Uganda, we might not see the opportunities, but there are a lot of business opportunities in Uganda, and there are a lot of companies from here which are operating in Uganda. When you come there, you'll see the business opportunities, and you grab them. The opportunities for networking with your colleagues from the other parts of the world, and most especially from Africa. We wouldn't love to see the Nigerians and the Ghanaians dominating us in our own region. So we expect a lot of people coming in from Kenya. In 2018, the East African Congress of Accountants is going to be held in Kenya. So it is going to set a platform for you to market the East African Congress of Accountants to the rest of East Africa, if you are there. When a person comes from here to Uganda, especially people from Nairobi, one thing they wouldn't miss is shopping. We have some nice things, especially ladies' bags. So we provided 2 afternoons, which will be free. You can either tour Kampala, or you are free to go and shop. You could go for a boat ride or engage in sports. Fellow CPS, welcome to Uganda. Welcome to Kampala, the city that will not allow you to sleep. Thank you.
So I'll quickly make a few announcements, and then I'll call upon the CEO just to say a word or two to close. Okay, thank you. So first, those of us who may want airport transfer facility or support on Saturday, you're requested to register before you go, because you have to do the aggregates and know what time would be good for you when it comes to taking the airport. That do at the desk, at the secretariat desk on your way out. If you'd like to have airport transfers on Saturday, kindly register on your way out. Number 2, tomorrow when you come ready for the outdoor activities. because after lunch, those shall be going to Wild Waters. The buses will be ready to take you there directly. If you have your costume, keep in your bags. Then after that, you can just head towards the outdoor activities. We shall have some activities at Wild Waters, some at White Sands, and then those who may want to go to ICPAK, I hope you also be ready for the same. Registration was taking place at the Secretariat desk. If you have not done that, do so on your way out. Yesterday, we got a lot of feedback on how the day was. We request you once again to give us feedback. SMS was sent, email was sent to your email addresses. Please click the link, give us your feedback. It's essential for us to make it much better. Then finally, those of us who may want to come with an accompanying person for dinner tomorrow, we have made a provision for that. You just need to pay something small, a token, 3,500 for one more accompanying person. And if you have a couple, one of them must be a CPA, you pay 6,000 for that. The procedure is you pay through the M-Pesa. The pay bill number is 722-722. Then you have AS and the member number of one of the couple. That is if it's you or one of the members coming. 722-722. Then the account is AS, then put the member number. Now at this point, I want to invite the CEO just say one or two things before we leave. As it comes, I remind you of these items which were picked. Be ready. You have them right after this.
Thank you, Tom, and the delegates for paying attention for the whole day. It's been quite engaging. This is just an announcement for the branch officials to recall that we have a meeting at 5:30. So, and the venue, I believe, has been circulated. The other thing is to request the accountants and the members and the friends of the Institute. We are in the process of making the Accountant General very self-sustaining, and the opportunities for advertisement. Support ICPAK if your company does some advertising. Remember, nowadays we are doing 17,000 copies in circulation. That is more circulation than some of the places that we advertise. So improve the feasibility of your employer through advertising on the Accountant General. You'll even note, it even goes beyond that. We have the journal in digital format from this month. If you go to ICPAK Live, you don't need to wait for your copy in the post office. You can read it at the comfort of your phone. And finally, let's come tomorrow. I'm trying to assess the program, and I'm saying tomorrow will be the climax of the week because we'll be having motivational talk in the morning. And after that, if you look at the program, is none but our own CPAs who have decided to be politicians. And because we know next year is a political year for us, let's come and see, possibly it will be the defining moment for some of us to decide to be politicians henceforth. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Let us all rise up to close the day with our prayer. Controls, I hope you're ready now. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. Have a blessed evening.
Gemo Pau, frontiere aliwa. Kanga foto. Tutu roba. Amiyo. Amiyo. Edi oya kobina te amona nzambe te. Oya kobina te amo Kristo te. Ah, Jésus Seigneur. Seigneur bien. Ozana bile belete boza bebingine kaka mabino ala. Omo bomba bomba. Ibale Ahmed Bakayoko, l'homme du